Imagine this scenario. You spend 2 months writing a grant, you submit it, you then wait another 6 months to hear if you're successful or not. You see that email come through, open it up, and what do you find? Thank you for applying, but this time you are unsuccessful. Today we're highlighting 9 reasons why your grant might have been rejected and the strategies you can use to improve your success next time. Hey, Dr. Ken, Dutton-Regester here, and today we're highlighting 9 reasons why your grant may have been rejected. Now, I've been there, you've been there, we've probably all been there, taking the time to write a grant, submitting it, and then getting that rejection letter or email. It's tough. And we all know in the back of our minds that not every grant is going to be successful. But there's definitely things that you can do or things that you can think about to try and improve your success next time around. So let's get into 9 potential ways of why a grant is rejected and how you can improve it next time. Reason number 1, your project doesn't fit the scope of the grant. Now, all funding bodies have specific criteria that they outline in their calls for funding. So here they're typically looking for key projects that fit that criteria. Now, it may be tempting if you've got a really great project idea, and I know we have a lot of great project ideas, it may be tempting to submit it to a funding body or to a grant scheme that may not be quite closely matched or may be close enough that you'll see how it go. Trust me, it tends to not work that great. The better way to do it is to give the funding agency a call and actually pitch them the project. Ring them up, say, you know what, I've got this idea, I'm not sure if it fits the criteria or not, what do you think? And here they'll be able to give you a clear yes or no as to whether they think it will be successful. Now this 5-minute call can save you a ton of time because we know that writing a grant from start to finish effectively, building the team, building the budget out, getting your track record, CV all up to date can take a lot of time. Sometimes it can take up to 2 months. So spending 2 months to fit and write a grant specific to this grant application, and you know it's not going to get funded straight off the bat because it doesn't match those criteria, is just a waste of time. Now beyond, if you can't access the funding body itself, try and track down the marking criteria. So often a lot of funding bodies will include the marking criteria with it, and I'll say exactly what a top funded project will score highly on. And here you can sort of really see if what you're pitching is going to be likely successful or aligned with those goals. So just to reassess, point number 1, make sure it fits the scope because you don't want to be writing a grant that's going to get rejected straight off the bat. Point number 2, equally as important as the scope, is eligibility. A lot of these grants have particular eligibility in regards to who they're looking for or what types of projects they are willing to fund. And so this can come down from the institute or university that you're at and your affiliations, all the way to the researcher themselves. When it comes to the researcher, we're talking usually about career stage. So how many years post PhD are you? Maybe you have to be within 2 years after your PhD to apply for this. Maybe you need to have 10 years worth of academic track record before you apply for it. Know exactly what they're looking for will determine whether you fit into that criteria or not. Now, sometimes you can stretch this a little bit, potentially if you've had some issues that have come throughout your personal or research life. So say, for example, this is a grant that has an eligibility criteria of no more than 2 years post PhD. Here you can begin to extend this possibly if you've had some circumstances like a personal issue that made you take off 6 months of time. You can begin to extend that, but you do need to check with the funding body whether they allow this, which usually they do, but then also get their agreement that they also say that yes, we can extend the deadline of that PhD cutoff because of those extenuating circumstances. So it's really important to stick to that eligibility criteria because often after you submit, there's an initial quality control check to make sure that you fit that eligibility. Now, some funding bodies will tell you straight up, if you happen to not meet that eligibility. So maybe you submit the grant and a month later they say, sorry, you're not eligible because of blah. But a number of funding bodies may not even tell you until after the funding outcomes are announced. Now that could potentially be 6 months, 8 months of waiting time, where if you knew that this grant could have been better suited somewhere else, you could have submitted to another funding body and potentially got the funding before even finding out. So make sure to check the eligibility criteria. So reason number 3, track record. Now, it's the reality of funding that funding bodies will like to fund those that have a good track record. And this can not only mean publications or previous grant funding, previous awards, but it could also be a track record in successfully achieving or using a particular methodology that you're planning to use in your project grant. So again, fitting with the eligibility criteria in the previous point, there may be specific aspects that they're looking for that will determine whether you have a good track record or not. Obviously, if the grant's geared towards an early career researcher, say less than 5 years, your track record doesn't have to be as expansive. But if you're looking at a grant that says up to 10 years post PhD, realize that if you're first year out, you're going to be competing with those with 10 years worth of experience. And while it is possible you could be successful, the chances of potentially competing against a post 10-year PhD person is going to be very challenging. So sometimes you can use those criteria to determine if your track record is going to be suitable for the grant that you're applying for. Now, it can be very tempting to just go ahead and submit. Some people have the train of thought that they would like to submit a grant and get some feedback, so they're going into it knowing that they're going to get rejected. But I'm sort of more of the camp of trying to only submit grants to funding bodies that you have a chance at. Not only is this reducing your potential time of writing grants, i.e. allowing you to do more projects, but B, it's stopping wastage of reviewer time as well. So you got to think about it. If you're submitting a lot of grants out there and you're knowing that they're going to get rejected just looking for feedback, you're potentially wasting 3 reviewers out there's time, which is a lot of scientific research that could be doing better. So instead, take your track record or your whole complete grant application and send it to a colleague instead. That will give you the same sort of feedback, and hopefully you can use that as a way to build on or know if you're going to be competitive in that funding scheme. So getting the support of mentors, getting their advice, and seeing what your realistic chances of getting it is really important, because it can stop you wasting a lot of time. Reason number 4, your team doesn't make sense. So excluding salary, fellowship-based applications, if we're talking a project grant application, most often you've assembled a team to go in there. So you'll have yourself sometimes as a lead investigator, or maybe you're contributing to a team, and then 3 to 4 other potential members, as well as staff that might be included on that proposal. Now, when a reviewing body or someone reviewing your grant will look at that team, they're looking to make sure that it makes sense. Do all of these people, are they all providing something? Are they providing value to the grant? Is the value providing make sense for the project that you're pitching? Or is it likely that you might be CV stacking? Now, this is something that can really deter a lot of grant reviewers out. If it looks like you're putting on a really high profile name researcher and using their track record to boost up the track record on the team, but if that researcher has absolutely no relevance to the grant at all, this becomes very transparent very quickly, and it looks like that you're just putting them on there to make your team look more impressive and not actually make sense. So when you're assembling your grant, make sure you're putting together a good team that makes sense on paper and in terms of the scientific approach of what you're trying to do. Another thing that you might want to consider, some funding bodies are starting to look at different ratios of who are on the team. So Maybe they're looking at gender ratio. Are you including others from different backgrounds and perspectives? You can always then check on the funding bodies and what they're looking for. And I wouldn't say definitely put minorities or diverse or underprivileged groups on there just to force it in there. Make sure it makes sense. But it's worthwhile just double checking and going back through the grant applications that you have submitted or thinking about the ones moving forward. Is that, are you having that good balance of underrepresented minority or gender balance within your grant applications? Because it's starting to become more and more obvious that historically males have largely been funded, and we're missing out a lot of talent that could be put into those different grant applications. So think about that moving forward in your grant applications, because I've definitely seen it. A lot of funding bodies are starting to think about it. So make sure your team makes sense. Point number 5, and I'm really bad at this, is time. Giving yourself enough time to write the grant. Now, everyone who knows me knows I am a very last minute, leave it to as late as I can type of person, but this is the worst way to boost your success of getting funded with a grant. Grant writing takes a lot of time. You need to think of the idea, talk to people about the idea, massage it into a way that is really effective and going to appeal to a lot of people and make sense and create some actual good findings. Then you need to assemble a team, then you need to write it, you need to get the budget out there, you need to get quotes, you need to get invoices. There's a lot of work that goes into writing a grant. And once you've written it, ideally you need to get someone else to have a look at it to see if it makes sense. So giving yourself enough time is probably one of the key reasons why a lot of grants aren't as polished as they can be when they get submitted. And this directly translates into those outcomes once it goes to those who are reviewing it. So give yourself enough time, put out a bit of a calendar and fit different milestones or targets of how you're trying to finish writing that grant in the lead up so that you have enough time to send it to someone else. Give yourself enough time. So point number 6 is structure of the grant. Now, some funding bodies will have a specific structure that they would like you to use. Well, in this sense, it's a lot easier because you can just fill in each of those different gaps. But sometimes funding bodies, it's free range. You can put whatever information in whatever order that you would like to do. Now, it's really important that the first page contains as much information about the grant as possible. Something that really summarizes the scope and the impact of the project, outlines the aims and what you're trying to achieve, and lastly, what is the overall outcomes and objectives that it has within filling a knowledge gap or contributing to something in the world. So put as much information in there. So here we're talking, a little abstract, aims, and then outcomes, impact. It's very simple. You can then get into more detail later, but having that structure up front can be really useful because the reviewers, sometimes they're reviewing 25 grants and they have to do this outside of their own research work, sometimes in a space of 2 weeks. They're going to need something that's short, concise, compelling, and get them excited to want to read the rest of the grant. So keeping it short, concise, and keeping a logical structure and flow to the grant is really important. Now, a bit of a pro tip, what you can do is try and seek out other people that have been funded through that funding body and see what their applications look like. And even if this is a traditional government funding type approach, even just doing this process of seeing how other people structure their grants, particularly those that are successful, can give you an idea about how to put together your grant in a way that is obviously appealing for reviewers. A second tip, begin to explore using graphical abstracts or video abstracts. So a graphical abstract, you might have seen these becoming a lot more popular in papers, for example, paper publications. They'll often have a small little figure there that explains the whole diagram of either the paper or in this context of what you're trying to do with the grant. And this can be just break up the monotony of the text and give you a quick, short, snappy summary of what the grant is about. And when the grant reviewers are going back through and looking at their applications, they can quickly recognize what the grant application is and who they're talking about when they get to the review panels. Same with the video abstract. This is more of a modern idea, but the idea would be to create like a 2-minute video, put a link in your thing so the researchers can go to it and sort of get a quick snapshot of what the research you're trying to pitch for. Now, if you're interested in doing a video or even a graphical abstract, you should check out Animate Your Science. These guys are doing some really great work in communicating science in really effective ways. And they can help you out as a service to create your video abstract for you. Now, full disclosure, we have no financial affiliation with Animate Your Science, but I've seen their work and they're doing great things. So if you do need some help, definitely check them out because they can help you out. So point number 7, why your grant may be rejected. Consider that less is more. It's very tempting when you start putting together a grant that you have all this amazing information, this background literature, all the experiments that you want to do, but it can quickly become overwhelming for a grant reviewer. What you want is something that's simple, easy to read, and doesn't take a lot of thought to understand exactly what you're trying to pitch. So here, less is more. The more succinct that you can make it, the better. Now, we've often find that sort of those who are starting to write out their grants provide too much detail, particularly in their methods section. So they're breaking it down to the exact plasmid construct and the gene and the exact reagent. The grant reviewers aren't really looking for that. They're looking for the bigger picture stuff. They want to know, okay, what it is that you're trying to do and what is just the general methodology that you're planning, and then a little bit of detail, but not full experimental protocols. That's just way too much information, and you're going to be spending too much time in text writing that rather than focusing on explaining the science a bit better. So remember, less is more. So point number 8, submission errors. So this is something that makes grant managers absolutely have nightmares. So this is where you've spent all the time, you've done all the hard work, you've written everything, you've assembled a team, you've got your budget right, but there's key aspects of your grant application that do not fit the submission criteria. Maybe you've had the wrong font size and now you've got 1/3 extra amount of text in there. Maybe you're outside of the margin that they require. Funding bodies can be really tight and strict about this. Maybe you haven't included the right figures. Maybe the text in the figures is too small. All of these different things, at the most extreme, can get you excluded before it even goes out to review. And at the lowest extreme, it can really annoy reviewers reading it. So really make sure when you finalize, you get to that polished part of the grant right before you submit it, that you've correctly done the formatting and everything perfectly right, and you've submitted exactly to the funding body's requirements. Don't be the person that gets rejected because they used the wrong font size. That's just criminal. So point number 9, the last reason of why your grant possibly was rejected is that you didn't get it checked beforehand. Now, I've already mentioned this a couple of times in the previous points, but once you finish writing your grant, send it to a colleague to have a look at. There's nothing more important than getting someone else to have a fresh pair of eyes to go over it and see if it makes sense. And we're talking not only just a senior mentor or colleague who's in your research space, but send it to another scientist in a completely different field to see if it makes sense. Or even send it to maybe your partner or someone in your family who's got a reasonable amount of science knowledge base, but just sort of bounce it off and see what makes sense and see what doesn't. I think it's important to note that when a grant gets submitted to a funding body, often the people that you would think would be reviewing it, i.e. other experts in your direct field, often get excluded from reviewing that grant because they might have a conflict of interest. And so what this usually means is that sometimes you have reviewers who are sort of just on the fringe of what your field is, or maybe in a completely different field, but they have a basic core understanding of, say, molecular biology or something like that. So in that setting, your grant needs to be able to be understood by those people. So keep it simple. Make sure your text that you've written translate to a wide variety of different audiences, and make sure to get it checked, because getting feedback is incredibly important to making sure it's as polished as it can be before it gets submitted. So that's it for today. 9 reasons of why your grant may have been rejected and how you can improve your chances of being successful next time. So if you have any other potential ideas of why your grant could be rejected, put it in the comments below, because that will really help out as a good resource for anyone who comes across this video in the future. And if you like this video, make sure to give it a pipette thumbs up. And next week, we're going to be talking about how to get a postdoc. Remember, nothing ventured, nothing gained.